According to a new AARP poll out of Wisconsin, Donald Trump leads President Biden 50 to 45 among likely voters there. It's within the poll's margin of error. But what's telling is at the same time, the survey shows incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin leading her Republican opponent by 5 points. So basically the president running 10 points behind Senator Baldwin there. Meanwhile, a trusted election forecaster has shifted its projections in Donald Trump's favor following last month's debate. In new ratings, the Cook Political Report has moved the states of Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada from toss-ups to lean Republican. Meanwhile, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, Cook has changed the races from likely Democrat to lean Democrat. Those all were states and the district won by President Biden in 2020. For perspective, a Republican has not won the state of New Hampshire since George W. Bush in 2000, and a Republican hasn't carried Minnesota since Richard Nixon in 1972. So, Donnie, take all that and take this conversation we're hearing. You heard Speaker Pelosi in our last hour talking to Jonathan Lemire. Not exactly a full-throated endorsement, said we're waiting for his decision. He says, I've made my decision. I'm staying in. Where are we in this process right now?
You know, if you become a student of history, every society before they fall into a dictatorship, there's kind of acquiescence, then there's resignation. Feels like if we continue with Joe Biden, that's what we're doing. I do not believe in my heart of hearts, and I'm saying this on my children, that Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump, and that's all that matters. And Joe Biden is a great man, and he's been a great president. But we have to have the courage right now to look at the unknown. You know, right now it's a blank piece of paper. Let me say what the alternatives are. Vice President Harris, Josh Shapiro, Wes Moore, Gretchen Whitmer. Those, I believe, in my heart of hearts, give us a better chance. It's interesting. You mentioned the Times before. It says top Democrats swallow fears and back Biden. No, you can't swallow your fear. You know, the generations before us, they were great. They stormed Normandy, all right? They had to face bullets. We don't have to do that. We're just going to be judged if we have the courage to take on the unknown, and it's going to be messy and scary, and we have to break the furniture. And by the way, if we end up with Biden, it'll be a great stress test. But this is the time, and if everybody behind the scenes does not feel that Joe Biden can win, let's say it out loud. It doesn't mean Joe Biden's not a great man. He's not the solution now. We can't be governed by fear. And I just feel right now we're afraid of the unknown. The unknown can be exciting and scary at the same time. Let's not be fearful. So generations before us have not.
Donnie, Senator Michael Bennet came out on TV last night and said what you're saying. He said, I love Joe Biden. I think he's one of the best presidents in modern history, but I don't think he's going to beat Donald Trump in the fall. What's telling you that? Why don't you think Joe Biden
A very simple reason. The narrative, and Joe said this the other day, and I've said it, and a lot of people have said it, if the narrative is about Joe Biden, we lose. If the narrative is about Donald Trump, we win. We've given them the narrative. By the way, the show, where I'm 4 hours into the show, I think the word dictatorship has been mentioned once about Donald Trump. That's what has to happen. We are staring at a dystopian society. We are staring at the Handmaid's Tale. We can't run from fear right now. And to me, $1 billion is going to be spent basically saying Joe Biden, they're going to run the clips. People can't unsee what they saw. And we're giving people permission to vote for Donald Trump. So I see that $1 billion coming at us. I see every day the papers. I see every day. I don't know how to turn that narrative around. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm just coming from my heart. I'm coming from everything I know about communications and messaging. I think that the ship has sailed, and I think we have to be brave enough to acknowledge that.
And then we saw Michael Bennet last night on television saying that he thought that Joe Biden would lose. We've seen other Democrats hinting that they are unsure about the future. But there is a huge, huge difference between pushing someone out and allowing someone to step out on their own. So in your view, given human nature, what's the difference between pushing someone out and allowing the president to make his own decision on his own time? And how much time do you think he would have to make that decision?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. You know, I think, first of all, just in the way people are talking about this, it has become so hostile. It's become hostile online. It's become hostile interpersonally. And I would just say at the beginning, this is a This is a family fight. Families do fight, and it's a fight within the pro-democracy movement in this country, and it is an honorable argument. And I think we should, first of all, not be demonizing people who are landing in different places in this argument. And there's a lot of dismissal of the concerns that are being raised that are real concerns that the people who publicly are saying there's no issue are privately acknowledging there is an issue. In terms of the issue you raised, we just have a post up at the Ink today about what I see as Biden's three choices. I think, and I broke them down according to the kind of human response to threat: fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm not making the choice for him, and no one else here is going to make the choice for him, as you say. But I tried to handicap what those choices are. And I think when you talk about coming back from this, it would have to be the fight option is coming back twice as alive as any president living or dead. If you truly want to come back from this moment, if you want to prove Donnie wrong in what he just said, you actually have to show, not tell. Right. And I bet Donnie would happily retract what he said right now if Joe Biden came back.
Would love to. And
presented a level of vigor, presented a level of fight, laid out a second-term policy agenda that dazzled all of us into silence, that came back when the Supreme Court declares that the rule of law doesn't exist in this country anymore, came back within minutes with a forceful statement about packing the court, going to battle with that court. If Joe Biden wants to come back, it's not just a question of status quo, come back or go. It's a question of how would you come back in a way that would make people forget your date of birth. I think that's a possibility, but you have to want to do that. Then we get to the other option. If Joe Biden honestly looks at that and says, you know what, I actually am at a stage in life where I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to be twice as alive as any president living or dead. That is honorable, as you say. And I think there it is really crucial to understand this point. I learned this point when I was writing in my last book about AOC. She talks about learning from her mentor in Texas this idea of the golden gate of retreat. You have to give people the golden gate of retreat. You have to give people an honorable way out. And I think that's going to be really important here. I don't think he's going to be humiliated into a decision. I don't think he's going to be cornered into a decision. I think this has to be, and it legitimately is, if he makes that decision, the kind of George Washington move that you say goodbye to save democracy, to strengthen democracy, to establish an idea of democracy. What better act of optimism would there be in the future of this country, in the fact that it doesn't all depend on one random guy, that actually you are so confident in the extraordinary bench of talent in this country that you feel like you can do the George Washington thing. And finally, the third option I laid out, freeze. That is the truly catastrophic option, right? I think America can get through one way or another with the fight, stay and fight, or honorably flight. The freeze option is neither going big nor going home. It is staying in the status quo and kind of in a kind of low energy, low ambition way, muddling through, not delivering a second-term agenda that would dazzle young people, dazzle all the people who have legitimate concerns right now into stunned silence. The freeze option, the staying in and muddling through option, that is catastrophe. And so I want to know if the president plans to stay, can he stay and truly fight and be almost a version of Joe Biden that we have never seen yet?
So I think Joe Biden's probably, if he were to be watching right now, would be like, I have said I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere, which brings us back to fight. And I just want to respond to a couple of things that have been said here and so beautifully, and before you as well. There is a lot of hostility. There's a lot of hostility. And America has become open to this type of behavior over the past 4 to 8 years, and that's something to keep in mind. There are behaviors that are acceptable to Americans that once never were. Most of them behaviors conducted by former President Donald Trump, who is a convicted felon. Donnie said, we haven't heard the word dictatorship on the show at all. We had the opposition leader of Belarus on the show this morning, and she gave a flat-out warning to Americans of what it would look like if Trump were to win a second term. And she said it in the starkest of terms, and I urge our viewers to pull that up.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.